everyone, and welcome, Simran. My name is Abbie Haug, and I work for the Inclusive America Project at the Aspen Institute, where our work is focused on building the infrastructure for a thriving American religious pluralism, where everyone has the rights, freedoms, and safety to worship or not according to their conscience. A big part of that work is elevating leaders and programs all around the country who are already working to help make that thriving religious pluralism a reality. One of those leaders is Simran Jeet Singh, who is here with me and who I am thrilled to talk with today about his new children's book, Fauja Singh Keeps Going, the true story of the oldest person to ever run a marathon. Simran is a writer, a teacher, scholar, and an activist. He is the host of 2 podcasts, Becoming Less Racist, Lightening the Path to Anti-Racism, and Spirited, a podcast filled with interviews exploring diverse perspectives of faith and justice. He is a senior fellow at the Sikh Coalition, a 2020 Equality Fellow for the Open Society Foundation, a columnist for Religion News Service, a visiting professor at Union Seminary, and so much more. So Simran, it sounds like you're not that busy, I guess, but today we are here to celebrate and discuss your new role as a children's book author. So Simran, your book, Fauja Singh Keeps Going, is the first ever children's book from a major publisher to center a Sikh story. So I just want to start out by saying congratulations and also a big thank you for joining us here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. So I want to start out by saying that this book is really focused on the true story of Fauja Singh, who broke the record to become the first 100-year-old to run a marathon. So can you tell us a bit more about who Fauja Singh is and what about his particular story spoke to you and motivated you to write this book?
Sure. So Fauja Singh is quite a well-known figure internationally. I mean, in his 80s, he started running, and it was a refuge for him to deal with the depression and loneliness he was feeling after losing his loved ones. In his 90s, he began breaking some records, some world records in terms of running. He was quite fast and quite old. And yeah, it was really remarkable. And it was during this time that he really gained international celebrity. In fact, the first time I heard of him was, I was watching an Adidas commercial. I was watching TV and an Adidas commercial came on. And it was David Beckham, massive soccer star, Muhammad Ali, like 2 of my biggest athletic heroes. And this man in a turban and a beard, who was elderly. And I grew up in Texas. I had never seen anyone who looked like me being represented on TV as someone who was positive, someone who could be a hero, and especially not in the sporting world. And so I had to learn more about him. And the more I learned, the more inspired I became. In fact, a few years later, the day that he crossed the finish line at the age of 100 in Toronto, that was the day I signed up for my first marathon and started running seriously. And I haven't stopped since. So like a major influence on my life personally. And then the more I got to know him, we've met a few times. I spend as much time with him as I can when we're together. It's just that he's an incredible human being, really energetic, kind, compassionate. He's 109 now, and he's still got that same zest for life. I just love that energy. And he's got so much wisdom to offer. And so much of his story, I think, it's really simple life lessons that I think about for my own kids, like what I want to pass down to them. And so that's really why he has become like the subject of my admiration and also of this children's book.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear, and I think so remarkable how over the years it started with this commercial you saw on the TV and how that translated into this book. And I also must add, I think you did such a wonderful job, and also the illustrations having those pieces of his personality really come out and show while you're reading the story. So I think that's really a wonderful piece to hear you speak about that and then see that reflected in the book.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, one of the things with the book, it's a picture book biography, so we really wanted to be true to his story, and so I worked with him a lot to make sure the story was correct. And at least he was happy with it. And so did the illustrator. The illustrator is also based in the UK, like Fauja Singh. And she went and spent time with him, and she specializes in depicting the elderly. And for me, part of, in our culture, in South Asian culture, respect for our elders is such an important part of our tradition. And in a, in a COVID context here in the States where we're talking about our elders as disposable, it really resonated for me that like, we need to challenge ourselves in terms of how we think about who our heroes can be. And here's a man who's elderly. Here's a man who is an immigrant, someone who wears a turban and has a beard, someone who dealt with this. Like all of these things are so important to me as part of his story in terms of creating a new narrative for our kids and imagining who our heroes can be.
That's amazing. And I definitely want to come back to that point about storytelling and heroes and narratives. But before I do that, I want to make sure that I mention that not only was this book the first children's picture book from a major publisher to center a Sikh story, but it was also produced by an all South Asian team. So can you talk a bit about what that process was like and also what that meant to you and to the rest of the team?
Oh, I mean, it was so refreshing. I think, so this whole story starts with me as a kid growing up in Texas and going to the bookshelves at the stores and the libraries and never, ever seeing someone who looked like the people in my family. And it was just so sad. Like I would always be disappointed, and I wished I could share with my kids these kinds of stories so that they wouldn't have to feel the same way I did growing up. I remember as a kid, someone told me, I asked a librarian if there were books with characters who looked like me and my family, and they said it's not relatable. And to me, that struck me as like, not just that your stories don't matter, it's more like we specifically don't care about stories of people who look like you. And so I kind of made a promise to myself as a kid that I would do that. And when my daughter was born, 4.5 years ago now, that's when I went back to those same bookshelves and saw that nothing had changed. And that's when I really started in earnest to work on these books. And so the first person I brought into this project was an agent who was South Asian, Dimishri Prasanna. We pitched to a very well-respected publisher at Penguin Random House named Namrata Tripathi. And then when Namrata asked me who I would suggest for an illustrator, I immediately told her about this Punjabi Sikh writer based in the UK, Baljinder Kaur. And the cool thing about this experience and why I say it's so refreshing is because there are things that I would have never thought about in terms of representing South Asian identity and experiences that they brought to the table. So like, instead of me carrying all the weight in terms of being the token single person who is responsible for all this, like it was a team effort, and everything's more fun in a team, but also the collaboration helps you deal with some aspects of these experiences that you may not think of on your own. So like that's really cool. And then the other thing was, there were moments in telling the story where typically I feel like I might have to do some real lifting in terms of explaining how things work and why they matter. And in this situation, I just didn't have to, right? So I'll give you an example. Like there was this image in this book, I just love it, right? So like, it's an image of Fauja Singh's mother combing his hair as a child. And the illustrator, this is not by my suggestion, the illustrator just knew because we have the same cultural background. She knew the very specific type of Punjabi Sikh comb that I used growing up here in the States, the wooden comb we call a kanga. That's exactly how my mom would sit, like, and I would sit in front of her when she did my hair every morning and would comb it backwards. Like, this is what we mean when we say that representation matters, right? Like, no one else would have been able to capture this. Another one that I'm remembering right now, like it happened a lot, but like we were talking about this illustration. And this is where Fauja, for the first time, leaves India to go live with his family in England. And he's getting on an airplane. And I saw this illustration and I was like, hey, that looks kind of weird. Like, it looks weird to me that, like there's some kind of like colonization aspect to this where the white woman is up top welcoming Fauja and these brown skinned people to the UK. And in any other context, I felt like I would have had to like dig a little deeper into that. But with an all South Asian team, people who are cognizant of these issues already, like that's all I had to say. And then we were able to go deep into a conversation and talk through those issues without me feeling like I had to put on my professor hat or my professor turban and really kind of coach people through it and then figure out everything on my own, right? Like the collaboration of a team, like it was a really fun process.
That's amazing to hear the specific examples and how that representation in that team impacted every single part of this book and really made it, I think, the product that it turned out to be, and also was able to tell the story in its truest, most authentic form, having all those little details being in there.
Can I give one more example that's coming to mind?
Yeah, no, I'd love that.
So the illustrator, as she would, right? She just depicts Fauja Singh and his family's life in the way that she understood it. It's so authentic that when my daughter, when she was 3, that's the first time she saw this image.
Okay.
And she saw that and she said, "Hey, that's you and me every morning." Right. And like, to me, that was the dream of the book, that she would see herself represent, and kids everywhere who have been underrepresented or unrepresented would see themselves in it. But like, she wouldn't have seen that if the illustrator didn't specifically capture the way, I mean, the very specific Punjabi style of hair that we do for our young girls. And that's quite literally exactly how we do it. And it wasn't because I had suggested it or that because I was a dad who had 2 girls, I asked the illustrator to sort of build them into it. It just happened naturally, and it had such a huge impact for us.
So that directly leads into actually a quote of yours that I wanted to bring up and get more of your thoughts and reaction on, that you wrote in a recent Religion News Service article. You said, "I believe that if kids can learn to see the humanity of those who seem least familiar to them, they can learn to see the humanity in everyone they encounter, including their own." And I think that really speaks to exactly what you're talking about the role and importance of storytelling and representation from such a young age. So it's great to hear the example with your own daughter and your own children. And I'm just so excited and curious if you can speak a bit more, both about what this means for them and then so many other kids to be able to read a book like this.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess for me, in a context where certain communities and certain people are so deeply dehumanized, like part of our solution has to be to humanize one another. We have to learn how to connect with one another. And it's sad to say that, right? It's such a low bar. Like, we should just treat each other with respect, but it's a real thing. Exactly, and it's a real problem. And so for me, as I'm thinking about this, like what I've learned through my life is you're never going to lecture your way into dignity, right? If people aren't unable to see your humanity, you're not going to moralize or teach them otherwise. The real way to do that is through personal connection. And the way to make a connection is through storytelling. And so for me, I think one issue I've been thinking a lot about as a parent and as an educator is that we don't do a good job of introducing our kids to these kinds of stories at a young age, right? If you look at bookshelves, and the statistics tell us the same thing, we don't have this type of diverse representation, but more than like representation, we just don't have access to connecting with people's humanity who are different from us and have different experiences. And so that to me was like the driving force behind this book. Like, how do I tell a story about anyone from my community in a way that feels like people can enter into that story and really connect with it? And so Fauja Singh's was really helpful to me because in the social justice world, and I've been working in social justice now for 10 plus years, we talk a lot about intersectionality. And it's become a more sort of mainstream word now. And to me, finding humanity isn't worth it if it's just one community, right? It has to be for everybody, right? Finding liberation for people has to be for everybody. And that's what intersectionality means to me. And so Fauja Singh's story really spoke to me because as we're re-examining who our heroes can be, and learning to connect with his particular story, what it really opens up for us is conversations and reflections around certain aspects of identity that we don't always center, but also that we don't typically consider as equal, right? So like ableism is a serious problem in our society. We don't talk to our kids about it. We don't really talk about it amongst ourselves as adults either. And so to talk openly about Fauja Singh's disability, I think what I'm really hoping to do there is create an entry point into conversation about that. Ageism is a major problem. We were talking about that earlier. Racism, Fauja Singh endured all kinds of racism, and we're really intentional about addressing that in this book. Xenophobia as an immigrant, classism, right? All these kinds of things that really matter to me from a social justice perspective. It really comes through in his story, and we don't have to be didactic, we don't have to be preachy. If you can do it in an artful way, which I think we did in the book, then you can introduce these ideas into kids and then scaffold upwards as they go along, and open up these conversations that we don't take seriously often enough.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's so exciting about this is the way all of those important issues and discussions are connected to a story and connected to humanity, and sharing that story as the entry point, exactly as you're saying. And I just think that that is such a wonderful way to start a conversation for parents and children on a number of really critical, important topics. And I would be amiss if I didn't mention how all of those conversations and entry points are also so important in this current moment that is crazy and chaotic and unprecedented and difficult in so many ways. And I think there's something to a book of this, with this important story coming out in such an important moment. So I would just love to end on hearing a goal or some sort of hope that you have for this book, either in this current moment and then also in the future.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, nobody's asking what my goal is for the book. I would say, so one of the things I think about a lot as somebody who works in racial justice, but is also on the other side of marginalization frequently, typically when you go into a bookstore, you have children's books organized by title or theme or whatever, right? And then you have a separate section for diverse books. And what we essentially tell ourselves, and this is a tool of white supremacy that keeps us all divided, right? What we tell ourselves is that those stories are for those people. Stories with Black characters, Black stories are for Black people. Brown skinned kids, South Asian stories are for South Asian people, right? Like Latino stories, Latina stories are for Latino. And so I do find a lot of value for people in my community to feel like they're being represented for the first time. Like that's cool to me. But I worry that people outside of our community will see this and be like, oh, this is a cool book for them. I hope they enjoy it. Like for me, the anti-racist work that we all have to do means connecting with stories that aren't our own, right? On the basis of all types of identities. And it's not just racial, right? Anti-racist work is intersectional, and it can be, let's lift up heroes with disabilities or elders or whatever, gender, sexual orientation. Like those are the things we have to be teaching our kids. And so by not doing that, by not really connecting our kids with stories with people who are not like us, what we're essentially doing is reinforcing these same problems that our society keeps falling into over and over again. So my hope for the book is to reach a wider audience, to really help. We have for the first time a book from the top publisher in the world. We have for the first time international distribution. Like this is a real opportunity and a real moment where people are thinking about racial justice and like putting their lives on the line for racial justice. It's a unique moment, and I want to meet that moment in a way that helps folks connect with a community that's highly racialized and highly marginalized.
Mm-hmm. And so I think a great way to do that is to have everyone watching purchase the book, tell their friends about the book, and share the book. So can you tell us where we can buy the book, and also where we can connect with you more and stay up to date on the work that you're doing?
Oh, sure. The book is available everywhere the books are distributed. So it's online. That's probably the easiest way in this pandemic moment. But yeah, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, but really go for your local independents. Support your local bookstores. That's important. Bookshop.org will help you find that. In terms of myself, I am online as Sikhprof, Sikhprof, on social media. And yeah, I hang out online far more than I should. So hopefully I'll connect with you there.
We all are a bit now, but thank you so much, Simran. This has been a really important and wonderful conversation, and so excited to share it with so many others. So thank you.
Thank you, Abbie. Appreciate it.